Hello, Dr. Egan here. We are continuing on with our discussion of Chapter 1, The Science of Psychology. And in this section, I wanted to discuss the growth of psychology and how it evolved over time. Let's start out by talking about the Greek philosophers. Prior to the 5th century BCE, people felt that their mental processes, by that I mean our thoughts and emotions, were the work of spirits and gods. And Greek philosophers, namely Socrates, felt we were born with knowledge and we could gain access by reasoning correctly. He felt that minds and souls ceased to exist once we die. Around this time, the concept of dualism was taking form. This refers to the fact that thoughts and ideas were believed to be distinct from the world of real objects. Okay, your objects that exist in the world are completely separate than our thoughts and ideas, which are, internal. Plato, he was a student of Socrates, and he felt that reason was responsible for balancing our desires or our appetites with our spirit when we're trying to pursue a goal and using our reason to do so. So Freud, we'll hear later in the semester, Freud definitely echoed this mindset. Aristotle was a student of Plato, and he believed that we acquire knowledge by observing the physical world and using logic and reasoning to make sense of what we observe. He didn't really feel that there was innate knowledge. He felt that basically the focus should be on observation and reasoning. So he definitely was a precursor for how we understand studying behavior now. In the Dark Ages, we saw some differences here. Descartes we're talking about, Locke, Hobbes, Darwin, and Descartes felt that the human mind is not subject to laws. He felt that the mind controls the body, and then the body provides information for the mind. And this is also another subset of dualism, of the mind controlling the body and the body providing information for the mind. Locke felt that we gained knowledge through experience, and he felt that the mind at birth was what he called a tabula rasa, which is a blank slate. And you might remember hearing about Locke from, I don't know, history or something in high school. But he felt we were born and we just were a blank slate, and we went out and experienced the world, and that's how we acquired knowledge. In Hobbes, he stated that the concepts of soul or spirit, mind, that they're meaningless, that basically our thoughts and experiences are byproducts of the working of our brain. So he, as we go through the semester and we talk about the concept of what behaviorism is, what Hobbes says is linked to those concepts. Darwin, he felt that the mind is unobservable. Okay, you can't see what's happening in the mind, so it can't really be studied. But he recognized that behavior is observable, and he felt it should be studied. So he approached things with an evolutionary psychology perspective. He felt that behavior evolves and if it contributes to the survival of a species, and if behavior ends up being detrimental to the survival of a species, it's going to disappear over time. In this stage of psychology, as it developed, through the ages, structuralism and functionalism played a role. Wundt and Titchener were two psychologists who played a role in structuralism. And Wundt was responsible, he's considered responsible for the birth of psychology back in 1879. And he found the first psychological lab at a university in Germany. And he was really interested in memory and selective attention. And he wanted to study this and focused on using measurement and experimentation. So he felt or this was sort of the turning point where we saw that psychology became less of a philosophy and more of a science. Titchener was an American psychologist. So Wundt was a German psychologist, and Titchener was an American psychologist. And he talked about consciousness and breaking it down into three elements. He talked about physical sensations, what we see, feelings, like liking or disliking something, and images such as memories. He wanted to identify these elements and show how they could be combined and integrated. So structuralism is what sort of encapsulates the ideas of Wundt and Titchener, and it really didn't stick around long. I mean, it was a theory in psychology that was short-lived. It didn't have a huge long-term effect, but what did come from it was the study of perception and sensation. So just thinking about how we perceive the world, how we understand information that comes into our senses. This was where their influence was great, is because that's something we continue to study to this day. With regard to functionalism, the name that's most associated with functionalism is William James. And he talked about how pure sensations without associations don't exist. Our minds are constantly weaving associations and revising experience. Perceptions, emotions, images, they can't be separated from one another. It's a continuous stream of consciousness, and these mental associations allow us to benefit from previous experience. So our nervous system responds in a way that allows each repetition to be easier than the last. And so it's just this constant flow that takes place between all of these things. So let's move on to the next. Moving on from structuralism and functionalism, we move into psychodynamic psychology, and the theorist or the psychologist we always associate with psychodynamic theory is Freud. And he really focused on nervous ailments that he felt were psychological rather than physiological. Okay, so he's a controversial guy. He was a physician. He was initially interested in the central nervous system. He felt that so much of what drives human behavior comes from what our unconscious desires are. So we have these unconscious desires that are constantly pulling us in this direction or that direction. And as a result, it impacts our behavior. And we're going to talk about Freud sort of here and there throughout the semester. And what I wanted to point out with this slide is that there's a lot of aspects of Freud that we hear in popular culture, just in day-to-day life. And so here's some terms on this slide. You'll see penis envy, Oedipus complex, a Freudian slip. Things like when people talk about, oh, I had a dream last night, and what do you think that means? Is it significant? When somebody says, oh, he's got mommy issues. When people talk about, well, I guess that was just my unconscious talking. All of these things are topics that originated in Freud's theories. And we're going to talk about him throughout the semester, and we'll break down some of these things. But I just wanted to point out how Freud is really inundated in our day-to-day culture and our day-to-day language. Let's move on from talking about psychodynamic theory and Freud, and I want to move to talking about behaviorism. And there's 3 theorists that I want to briefly mention, and we're going to talk about them a little later in the semester. The first one is Watson, the second one is Pavlov, and the third one is B.F. Skinner. And Watson really initiated the idea of pointing out that you can't see or define consciousness, and he felt that if you can't locate or measure something, it can't be the object of scientific study. So for him, he felt that studies should consist of examining only behavior that's observable and measurable. Pavlov, who was also a behaviorist and had this similar mindset, he identified the concept of conditioning. And we're going to talk more about this in chapter 5. But Pavlov, who was originally studying how dogs digest food or something like that, he noticed that the dogs in his lab began to salivate as soon as they heard their feeder, the person who was going to feed them, coming before they could even see or smell their dinner. And so he wanted to see if salivation was an automatic reflex and if it could be shaped by learning. So he paired food with a buzzer, okay? So that dogs learned that even when the buzzer was sounded without the presence of food, they still were conditioned to salivate, so that they associated food with the buzzer. So the buzzer by itself could elicit a response, a physical response of salivating. And this was a simple form of training called conditioning, where he conditioned these dogs to salivate to the sound of a buzzer versus waiting until food was actually presented. With B.F. Skinner, he added to Watson's theory with the concept of reinforcement. And so basically in this theory, it's you're rewarding subjects for behavior when they behave in a way you want them to. So, okay, you did a great job, tying your shoes, so therefore I'm going to give you a sticker. I just reinforced your shoe tying behavior by giving you a sticker. So these are concepts that are discussed in behaviorism, and we're going to talk a lot more about them as the semester goes on. By the 1960s, behaviorism started to fall out of fashion a little bit. People began to ask more questions about aspects of the mind that you couldn't see. So there was two kinds of psychology that emerged from this, what's known as the cognitive revolution. And Gestalt psychology focused on how people perceive and experience objects as whole patterns. So you see here on the slide, there's this blurb over to the right where it's obviously a paragraph, and there's a lot of words that are missing letters, or the letters are in a different order. But the purpose that I have for this is for you to see that even though there's aspects of this paragraph that don't make sense or in direct contradiction of what you know about the English language, you really can still read it. And so Gestalt psychology focuses on how, when you look at that paragraph, you're looking at it as a whole, and you're getting an overall perception about it, and from there you can draw conclusions and you can figure out meaning. Humanistic psychology is a different kind of psychology than Gestalt psychology, where it emphasizes human potential. Okay, so it focuses on love, feelings of belonging and safety and self-esteem, and people having maximizing their experiences. And a primary theorist that we think of with humanistic psychology is Maslow. And so here I'm just going to show you this, and we'll revisit again later on the semester, is what's called Maslow's theory of self-actualization, and he has this diagram here where he says that people will be able to expand as a person or reach your highest potential, emotional potential, if you're able to have some basic needs met. So your physiological needs, being sure where food is going to come from and water and shelter is going to come from, once those needs are met, you're able to go and keep moving up the pyramid until you can get to a point where you've reached your highest potential, where you've sort of transcended the physical needs of your body and able to get sort of an advanced understanding. So we'll hear more about him, but he talks about, and humanistic psychologists in general emphasize the nonverbal experience and focusing on your sort of state of consciousness and how you can reach your full human potential. Overall, cognitive psychology is the study of mental processes in the broadest sense: thinking, feeling, learning, problem solving. And you can see over here in this diagram, I sort of have, the central focus of cognitive psychology and where it can kind of branch out and in what areas it can look at. And it really is reliant on empirical research. I mean, there's scientific, high quality studies out there to investigate this field. And now that we're having so many more medical advances, brain imaging technology like MRIs, PET scans, all sorts of functional MRIs can help examine these mechanisms, these neurological mechanisms, and give us a lot more insight about learning, memory, emotions, intelligence, things like that.